Welcome to Robotics and Automation News webinars, where you can be part of a global event without leaving your home or office. Attend our live webinars and communicate directly with influential professionals in your industry.
My name is Abdul Muntakim and I'm editor of Robotics and Automation News. I'm here today with Jacob Turner, author of Robot Rules, Regulating Artificial Intelligence, a new book about robotics and the ethics and jurisprudence of robots and who controls them, who's responsible for them, and so on. I'll let Jacob explain the book to you in a presentation that he's prepared for us. Jacob, would you like to go ahead and make your presentation?
Thanks very much, Abdul. As you kindly said, I'm the author of a new book all about AI, robots, their ethics, and how they can be governed. I'll start off by talking about definitions. Now, I'm a lawyer, and lawyers love definitions. And I think when we're talking about AI and robots, it's really important to start off with this because one of the difficulties in this area is that people often talk across purposes. They use different definitions, and so you can't really have a proper conversation. So what am I talking about when I talk about robots and AI? For me, robots and robots in the book are not mechanical things which are purely automated. They're not the types of robots which you see on the screen building cars, because these are all fully pre-programmed. There's no discretion, there's no autonomy in what these robots are doing. They're simply executing instructions which they've been given. So for me, that's not a robot in the core sense, although I appreciate that sometimes when people talk about robots, that's what they mean. When I talk about robots, I mean the embodied versions of artificial intelligence, so a physical type of artificial intelligence. And in the middle of the screen, there is a picture of a neural net, which for me is a type of artificial intelligence. When I talk about artificial intelligence, what I mean is a system which can make decisions in a manner which is rational, which is based on some kind of goal-orientated process, but which isn't fully pre-programmed by some kind of an engineer or programmer. So what might be spoken of as a logic-based system or an expert system, where you have a series of yes or no answers which eventually leads to a conclusion from a given input, that for me isn't really artificial intelligence, because it's just a set of automated instructions that leads to an outcome, and it can all be traced back to what a human has decided to put into it. And so lastly, on the far side of the screen, when I talk about artificial intelligence, I'm not talking about necessarily full general artificial intelligence of the type that we see in sci-fi films, C-3PO, the Terminator, the kinds of things that newspapers and the media often describe when they talk about artificial intelligence. From my perspective, artificial intelligence goes down to even very narrow systems which are adept at just doing one task, whether that is translating text from one language to another, or doing something like navigating in an unfamiliar environment. Those would just as much be examples of artificial intelligence as would be a full humanoid robot. But I don't think it's that helpful at this stage to talk about the what will happen with full humanoid robots, because we're nowhere near that yet, and we may never get there. So that's my my bit on definitions. Now, building from that definition about AI being something which is autonomous, which is making its own decisions, the big question for me is whether AI is unique, whether it is different from other technologies, other phenomena which have come before. And I say it is. I say that AI is different, and we therefore need to think carefully about how we treat that from an ethical perspective and also from a legal perspective. So I'll give a couple of examples of why I think AI is different. So machine learning, as readers and listeners will probably be aware, is the process by which a system which is artificial can teach itself to do things that it hasn't been specifically programmed to do in advance. Machine learning isn't the only type of AI out there by any means. There are lots of ways of achieving AI, but it's certainly the most popular type of AI at the moment, particularly since the second AI spring started in around about 2010, mostly based on machine learning and artificial neural net technology. And the interesting thing about machine learning, and the reason why it fulfills the definition of AI, is that it is taking choices unpredictably. The programmers of a machine learning system often don't know the way in which it will come to a conclusion, or indeed what conclusion it will come to. AutoML, which is a newer technology developed predominantly by Google, makes the system even more independent from any initial human programmers by stripping out a lot of the types of steps that human programmers have previously needed to do when setting up and adjusting a system in order to optimize it. There's one particular instance of a machine learning system, in particular a deep neural net, that I think is a really good example of why AI is unique in terms of its autonomy. And that is in the famous series of games that AlphaGo, the program created by DeepMind to play an Asian board game called Go, which is extremely complicated, much more so than chess. Now, I played Lisa Doll, who was one of the world champions at this game, in a best of 5 series. It wasn't unusual that a computer should beat a human at a board game. I'm not saying that was unique, because this has been happening for many years, famously Deep Blue with Garry Kasparov in chess some 15 or so years earlier. The interesting thing about what happened with AlphaGo and Lisa Doll was in Game 2, Move 37. This was the moment at which the AI system did something which was completely different from the moves that anyone had taken before. In fact, most of the people watching thought that it was a glitch with the system. It did something which was totally inexplicable. And then what happened was, a couple of hours later, that inexplicable, mysterious move turned out to be the winning move in the game. And so what this demonstrates is that the AI system had thought of a new way of doing things that wasn't predicted by its programmers. It went beyond them. It wasn't foreseeable by the programmers. And from a legal perspective, this is very important, because at the moment, all legal systems try to tie any consequences back to a choice which has been made by a human, even if ultimately it is ascribed to a company. Companies are based on humans. Everything refers back to human choices. But if you have a situation where there is a system which is not human, which is making choices, then there's a difficulty in saying who or what will be responsible for whatever that system has done. And this is true all the more so with even more advanced systems than AlphaGo, like AlphaGo Zero, which didn't learn from any human examples. It taught itself how to play the game, and in fact mastered it and beat the previous version of AlphaGo within a number of days. So this is yet another example of a system which is becoming increasingly adept, but also increasingly independent from any human input. So I suggest in the book that this autonomy, this uniqueness of AI, leads to 3 problems. Firstly, responsibility. Who is liable if AI causes harm? If a self-driving car crashes into pedestrians, who is responsible? Is it the designer of the initial AI system? Is it the operator? Is it a sub-licensee of some kind? At the moment, it's very unclear, and the reason is because of this independent decision making. But the responsibility problem doesn't just relate to harm caused by AI, because AI can also create lots of very beneficial things. AI is already creating art. We saw that a painting by an AI program a few weeks ago sold for, I believe, $320,000. There's recently been an advertisement for Lexus cars, which was created by an AI program. Again, these acts of creativity, if they are done by humans, these are covered by intellectual property law. So whoever is the creative force behind a painting, a piece of music, a book, and so on, they get to own the intellectual property in that. But if the creative force is an AI system, if it's a robot, then current legal systems have a gap. We just don't know who would be the owner there. Would anyone be the owner? So that's the first problem. The second problem is rights for AI. Now, I said that I don't really talk about human level AI, but we may want to think about some point in the future where AI does acquire something which resembles consciousness, something which resembles the ability to feel pain. Now, I'm not saying we're anywhere near that at the moment, but it is possible, and there are certainly scientific lines of inquiry which are going on at the moment, which suggest that you can build an AI system which has some ability to realize that things are going on which it finds unpleasant in a sense, which are negative sensations for it. And taken down to its basics, that is what pain is, certainly in animals and less sophisticated systems than humans. We protect animals' rights, even though they may not be fully conscious in the way that we are. So I don't think it's completely unreasonable to think about AI rights being protected one day. But that's only one half of rights. A much more immediate part of rights for robots and AI is to give them what's called legal personality. Now, there are lots of fictional legal persons that we already recognize. A major example of this is companies. We give companies like Coca-Cola, like Microsoft, like Google, like Amazon, we give them rights and obligations. They can sue in a court, they can be sued in a court, they can own property, they can own money, they can pay their own taxes. And this is just a fictional invention in order to serve wider human aims. Creating companies which are separate from their owners promotes innovation, it promotes risk-taking. It's very useful for a productive economy that there should be companies. So one solution to the question of the question of who should be responsible if AI causes harm or creates something beneficial is for the AI to be responsible itself, to give it separate legal personality from its owners. And that's not to say that the AI would be taking every decision for itself, just in the same way that companies take decisions through humans. You could have an AI system doing that. But I think that may well be something that that actually does come about in the next 5 to 10 years. Interestingly, the European Parliament in February 2017 actually proposed that one solution to the question of responsibility for AI would be giving it a kind of electronic personality. So this is something that's being considered at the highest levels of government in some places. The third issue that I think AI gives rise to is in terms of ethics. Firstly, how should AI take difficult ethical decisions? As we delegate it increasingly important tasks, AI is going to have to take very difficult choices. So the classic one of these is the trolley problem, where you've got a self-driving car and somebody steps out in front of it. Whose life should it prioritize? The person inside the car, or the people inside the car, the people outside the car? What happens if the person outside the car is very old? What happens if the person outside the car is very young? You can think of all sorts of permutations of this problem. But the key thing is it doesn't just apply to self-driving cars. It applies to any kind of moral problem that AI is dealing with. So where you have, for example, AI being used in healthcare, deciding who should be prioritized in an accident and emergency ward, it's exactly the same kinds of difficult moral questions that the AI would have to engage in. So that's one area of ethics. Second area of ethics is, should AI take certain decisions at all? Should there be some decisions which are exclusive to humans? And one that's often brought up here is in autonomous weapons. A lot of people say that AI should never be able to take a life or death decision as to whether to fire a missile and potentially kill a combatant, potentially kill some civilians. And so that again is a very difficult question that we're going to have to work out. And I think these questions become all the more pressing the more advanced AI gets. If AI, for example, became better at fulfilling the aims in warfare than humans could, or if it became better at preventing deaths of pedestrians and drivers on the roads, increasingly we're going to have to think about what choices we want to delegate. So the first half of my book is about the problems. The second half of my book is about the solutions. I suggest that there are a couple of ways of solving these problems. Now, a lot of people will be familiar with Asimov's laws of robotics. They were very simple. There were 3, or in his later work, 4 of them. But ultimately, firstly, they were very overly simplistic, and they were only designed to lead to further problems so he could write interesting stories about them. But more importantly, Asimov, I think, was starting in the wrong place by just going to writing the rules. What you need to do before writing the rules is to think about how they're going to be structured, who's going to enforce them, what institutions are going to be creating these rules. And that's really the way that my book looked at it. So I say there are a few best practices that governments, companies, regulators can take when setting new rules for artificial intelligence and robots. Firstly, they should be done across different sectors. So it's no good, in my view, having one set of rules for self-driving cars, one set of rules for AI in medicine, one set of rules for AI in drones, and so on and so forth. And one of the reasons for this is that artificial intelligence technology is becoming increasingly general in nature. It's moving from just doing one task to being able to do lots of different tasks. And so where you've got the same AI program, which is potentially operating across a number of different sectors, it just doesn't make sense. It would be very wasteful to have totally different regulations. Now, you do need some differences between sectors, and I totally understand that point. But I think at a high level, there do need to be some types of coordinating themes and features which unite the way that different sectors are regulated. The next point is that rules for AI and robots should be coordinated internationally. Right now, we have an amazing opportunity because there are not greatly different rules for AI across many different countries. Most countries don't have any rules at all for AI. And differences between regulation in countries leads to significant barriers to trade. And we see this with the problems that the UK may well have in terms of leaving the EU. There are certain non-tariff barriers that might prevent trading. We don't have non-tariff barriers in AI, and I think it would be a great thing to avoid them. It would increase trade between countries. It would reduce the costs of companies in trying to comply with multiple different systems, and ultimately it would increase consumer welfare. Thirdly, the way in which AI rules should be made ought to be flexible and responsive. And there are some good examples of how regulators have previously addressed new technology. It might be said that, oh, we shouldn't let governments get involved in regulating AI because it's too complicated for them. They'll never understand it. But governments regulate very complicated sectors all the time. And they do so by listening to experts, and that's exactly what we need to do with AI. So just as pharmaceuticals is regulated, just as nuclear power is regulated, just as human fertilization and embryology is regulated, we should adopt some of those same principles with regards to the regulation of AI. Finally, I suggest that AI can be split into rules for the creators. So these are design principles for human AI programmers, and rules for the creations. These are ethical principles which can and should potentially be programmed into the AI itself so that they are self-executing. Examples of the latter might include a basic set of principles on avoiding bias so far as possible. You might want to have an inbuilt off switch, which can't be deactivated by the AI. These are the types of basic requirements which you may want to put into all AI systems, regardless of what sector you find them. So that's a summary of my of my work. I hope you found it interesting, and there are some details on screen about how you can learn more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jacob. That was an excellent presentation, very thorough, and a lot of the questions I had in mind before I started talking to you, I had found the answers in your presentation, so much appreciated. I'm sure everybody will find it interesting and insightful. I'll try and maybe get you to elaborate or expand on one or two of the points that I think probably more pressing. As you say, the humanoid question is far off, even though senior politicians, even at European Union level, discussing such things. But one of the things I was thinking that might be more pressing is the one that you touched on about autonomous cars, vehicles, what decisions they make, whether to prioritize the people inside the car or outside the car. Without getting you to repeat that, but I was just wondering, do you know what insurance companies are currently doing in terms of addressing the technology, the autonomous technology that is already present in new cars now? Because new cars now, as you know, they can park themselves, they can stay in lane, change lanes on motorways, brake in an emergency situation when the driver has lost concentration or something like that. There are things that it can do autonomously. There are autonomous features already in cars. So do you know what there are what insurance companies or maybe the legal regulation making bodies or whatever they are, what kind of developments are there in that sort of field relating to those technologies?
Thanks. That's a great question, and I think you're absolutely right to focus on what insurers are doing, because it's insurers that are having to really try to understand these issues concerning AI and its practical applications right now. The reason being that insurers, as you'll know, will be writing policies that are going to be valid for the next 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And in order to do that, you need to predict what are going to be the problems in the next 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And because AI being rolled out is only relatively recent, they're having to deal with these issues for the first time now. They didn't have to deal with them 10 years ago. So in answer to your question about what are insurers doing, at the moment, there is a big scramble based on what I know from speaking to a number of different insurers, in order to understand that they're only really in the last year, possibly even less, starting to skill up in terms of how they will insure liabilities arising from artificial intelligence per se. In terms of the question of how they would do that for autonomous vehicles, there is a new piece of UK law which was passed earlier this year called the Automated and Electric Vehicles Act 2018, which makes a fundamental change for the way that insurance will work with regards to autonomous vehicles. And that is that the insurers, as a result of the Act, have to provide insurance cover for anything that the car does whilst in self-driving mode. Previously, the liability for the insurer had been based on what the insured driver would have done, whereas instead of insuring the driver, the insurers are being required by the Act just to insure what the car is doing, as if it were a driver in and of itself. And that's quite an important shift. So that's actually the only area where the government has stepped in and told the insurers what they have to do and what they have to insure. The governments haven't done that with any other of the uses of AI as yet. Part of the reason why they've done this is because the UK government really wanted to be the world leader on this topic. They wanted to get ahead of Germany so as to foster as much autonomous driving technology in the UK as possible. So the basic position is that the insurers, whether they like it or not, are on the hook for what the AI vehicles are doing. Now, it's not it's not necessarily all AI technology which is going to be caught by this. Some types of augmented driving, the driver will still be responsible. But given that the insurers are now liable, what they are increasingly looking to do and getting better at doing is saying to the designers of AI systems, whether these are the car manufacturers or other third parties, that those AI systems need to fulfill certain basic qualities. So one of the big sources of regulation for AI that I can foresee in the next couple of years is not necessarily going to be governments telling the AI companies how they should design their systems to be safe. It's actually going to be the insurers telling the AI companies, you need to require these basic standards in your technology, otherwise we're not going to issue you insurance policies.
Right, thanks for that. It's such an interesting question, because you start wondering where the line is drawn. You know, you were saying that there are some types of assisted driving technologies that where the driver would still be liable. There are others which you could say the car manufacturer or whoever is responsible for the AI would be liable. So I don't want to get into the very nuts and bolts of it, if you like, but it is a very interesting question. And sometimes it's such a difficult question, I imagine, that you think that people will, you know, some people might think it's best to avoid it altogether and not have those technologies in the market, on the market, on sale, and so on. But that's probably very, it's unrealistic. People do want technologies to come forward and make their lives better in some ways, and we'll deal with those questions. But I was just wondering what you think timetables are. I mean, you thanks for mentioning the Government Act, which it does sound like a new sort of direction to take, and things will be built on it. But what do you think of the timetable in terms of how long before a lot of these questions are answered and regulations drawn up, and the developers of AI and know what the limitations are, what they can do, and what they can sell, and so on? Because there's so many companies developing this kind of technologies, not just in autonomous cars, but also digital technologies that live only inside the computer. There probably will be rules governing all autonomous systems, whether they're virtual or whether they actually control a machine that moves and could be, a dangerous machine, and so on. But yeah, what do you think? This year, 2018, there's an act in the UK. There's probably similar acts here and there around the world, probably at state level or local level, maybe even national. But what's your estimation? You've looked into it, written a book and so on. Your guess is probably better than other people's. What do you, how do you predict things will turn out?
Well, it's quite uneven, the picture, both across different sectors and across the world more generally, in terms of between different countries. So the UK is definitely making a push in some areas. A lot of the focus, and even our conversation today, has been on self-driving cars to date. Another big area of focus, where there is developing regulation, is in AI's uses in financial technology. So, in fact, earlier this week, the Monetary Authority of Singapore released some guidelines for financial services firms to consider when they make decisions in relation to artificial intelligence and data analytics. So we can see the development in various places around the world of standards which may be legally binding in some cases, they may just be guidance in other cases, of how AI should operate. With regards to the trolley problem that I mentioned earlier, the German Federal Transport Commission has actually released a paper saying how car manufacturers should approach the ethics of deciding who to prioritize between passengers and pedestrians and so on. So overall, I think the growth in the next 1 to 5 years is likely to be fairly incremental, probably mostly related to transport and to financial technology. It's certainly possible that countries might make even more of a concerted effort and try to create AI regulation across the board, and that's definitely the approach that I suggest we should have, rather than having a piecemeal, haphazard one. But it remains to be seen whether that will happen. For a country which is most likely to do it, I would look at China. China has really been making a huge effort to look into regulation for AI. And even though perhaps some people in the West might assume that China is against all types of regulation and wouldn't want any of these controls, actually, particularly since 2017, it's really been trying to push forward standards for artificial intelligence. And given the high level of governmental coordination and control there is in that country, it would be comparatively easier there than perhaps in other states for them to institute these rules on a global basis across the entire country.
Okay, thank you. I haven't got any more questions, but I was just wondering how your book is doing. Tell us a bit about your book, and you said you released it a couple of weeks ago. Tell us about that a little bit.
Sure, that's right. So the book was released in ebook format earlier this month, and it's now out in hard copy formats. It's available online, either from the Palgrave Macmillan website or on Amazon and in various bricks and mortar bookstores as well. I also do seminars and talks about the book in various places around the world. I've spoken at a couple of different universities, Oxford, Cambridge in the UK, the Max Planck Institute in Hamburg. In January, I'll be speaking at some Canadian universities, McGill, University of Montreal, Queen's University in Kingston, as well as a couple of universities in the US. And in December next month, I'm speaking at a conference involving the Chinese government and the United Nations on artificial intelligence and national security in Shanghai. So always open to new conversations and new opportunities to discuss this topic with businesses and and regulators around the world. And generally speaking, my aim with the book is to not necessarily come with all of the answers to the questions I raise, but at the very least, I hope to make a contribution to the conversation.
Thank you very much.
Send us an email at sales@roboticsandautomationnews.com to register for one of our many upcoming webinars. And if you'd like us to host your webinar, we have a range of options, including long-term lead generation packages and marketing campaigns. We look forward to hearing from you soon.